Hey everybody, it's Brandon Russ. I wanted to thank you again for tuning into another Everyday Intuition. I love doing these podcasts, they're fantastic, and I meet the coolest people. And in this one that you're about to watch, I can't recommend this book enough. It's called Power Animals, and it's actually about the shaman's guide to power animals. Our guest, Lori Morrison, really she really just talks about the book a little bit in depth, but I cannot recommend this book enough as we get into her as a guest. Reason being, I'm just going to flip through and just randomly pull up one of the pages here, and I'm going to tell you it is so well descriptive. A lot of power animal books really kind of jump all over the place. This is formatted in such a way that it's really well done. It's easy to read, it's easy to understand, and it's a great quick reference guide. Not knocking all the other ones, but it seems like they always try to talk about topics and that sort of thing. Nope, this goes right to the animal. It's really clear and concise. And watch the podcast because she actually talks about how she came to write this. And you're going to click on the link below to get your own copy of this. And again, I can't recommend it enough. Be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast here, and check out Lori and all the cool stuff that she's got going on. All right, guys, without further ado, let's get to the podcast. All right, here we go. We're rolling. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Everyday Intuition. I'm your host, Brandon Russ. With us always is TC, and we have a very special guest here today. With us is Lori Morrison, and her journey actually, is an incredibly interesting one. And as always, we like to really present people on their path and how they got there. Well, she's a successful author today, but her trials and tribulations actually helped her get there. If you had met her some time ago, she might have talked about her degree from Washington University. She might have actually talked about being in banking and understanding the wholesale food industry. But through a course of real life experiences, she began to realize that she needed to look at things a little bit differently. She understands quite a bit and works with the mental health of where you're meant to go to in your spiritual journey. She works certainly with animals and shamanism. And more importantly, she creates kind of a safe space for you to do this journey to bring you to where you needed to be, or where you need to go, rather. She integrates science, she integrates the spiritual, and she is joining us here today from the lovely Sedona. My gosh. So you're in Sedona, Arizona, correct?
Yes, I'm on
Oh,
the banks of Oak Creek.
in the banks of Oak Creek. Well, this is great. So listen, I want to ask the first question here, insofar that um, you've kind of gone through so much to get yourself there, and I think a lot of people, when they start on their journey, this was never necessarily the intention, if you will. What was kind of the synopsis of what got you here? What was the cause and effect of your spiritual awakening, and how did you get here?
Well, I lived in El Salvador for most of my life. I was there for almost 30 years. And I lived in a very remote area the inside actually of a volcanic lake. And very remote, not a lot of neighbors around.
Hmm.
And on my 52nd birthday, um, I didn't realize it, but that particular day in the Mayan tradition is the day when your birthday aligns with the original Mayan calendar, cha-ching.
Wow.
So it's the only date, it's the only birthday. Because of course, they got rid of the Gregorian calendar, or they got rid of the Mayan calendar and converted it into the Gregorian. So we're all off a little bit because we're not on the original calendar that the Mayans had. So on my 52nd birthday, about 2 days before that, I was seeing beams of light coming down all over my property. And I was starting to shift, and I would look out over the property, And I would see like this Mayan world. And then, I go back to my third D world. So it was just, it kept shifting and shifting. And of course, I was perfectly a businesswoman, entrepreneur. I didn't know about, I knew a little bit about the Mayans because I
Mm.
lived among the communities there, but I didn't have enormous knowledge. And so then I started to hear voices. I could see things. And of course, this was very strange.
Mm.
And then that night of my birthday, the voices told me I almost kind of went into a trance-like, um, place, and they told me to go to the end of the peninsula of my property. So I walked down there. They told me to take a jug of water and a glass. So I went down there,
Mm.
and it was at nighttime, and I wasn't afraid. It seemed like I was supposed to do this, and that it was something that had come from some type of arrangement that I had made probably before I even came to Earth. And so it felt like I had arrived at this moment, and I got there, and then all of a sudden there were 13 ancestral Mayan spirits standing in a circle around me.
Wow.
And I didn't quite know what to make of all that.
Mm. Yeah.
And
So
they
so in
told,
this so in this moment, are you like, okay, what is this? And this is what I find a lot of times when people go through this, spiritual experience.
yeah, there's no
They
context for it.
Yeah, there's but or they rely on a context of what they were raised in. So, if it
Mm-hmm.
was Judaism, if it was Christianity, if it was
Mm-hmm.
whatever, they're like, okay, are these angels? They try and do the applicable thing. It's what the agreements teach us, and that is we agree to call a table a table. So we agree that a spiritual
Right.
event might be whatever. What was your takeaway on this? Was this just like so shifting that you're just like, okay, I'm into a different reality here? Is this 4D? Is it 5D? Where am I connected to?
I had no context,
Yeah.
no template of understanding. They told me to lay down on the ground, which I did, and then a light hit me, and I was unconscious for 3 hours and paralyzed.
Wow.
And so when I finally came back from the experience, I now understand that I was in the fifth dimension
Yeah.
of existence. And so I could only see people and things based on sacred geometry. And then I spoke fluent Mayan, and I had other languages that no one recognized. And I could see, interdimensionally very easily. And obviously, this created absolute chaos in my life because I had no context. And so I was in and out of mental hospitals for 2 years.
Mm.
But where the animals came in was the second night after this happened, 4 jaguars appeared to me. And they said that they would be teaching me how to be a shaman. And so I was not formally trained by a class. I had four animals who for 2 years taught me shamanism. And I had some significant downloads. For example, they would say, okay, we're going to talk. They would wake me up at 4 o'clock every morning. And they would say, okay, you're going to learn about plant medicine today. And then I just get a download, and I would walk by a plant and I knew what that plant was supposed to do. Plants that I had no idea that were
Wow.
relevant in my yard.
Wow. And
And the
when
teachings were all by them.
and what's interesting too is that when you're sharing this, and I certainly kind of got the whole fifth dimensional thing, download thing, and I think you say it perfectly. Or you describe your experience perfectly insofar that your body was paralyzed, but when you have this fifth dimension, or higher dimensional connections, your body is paralyzed for lack of purpose of use. It's not so much that it's an affliction.
Correct. Yeah. And
It's like,
also it's when you've been out of your body for too long, you don't you can it's hard for the two pieces to come together because I was also I had left my body 7 times, And
Wow.
people would say that I was dead because I wasn't, you know, reacting. So the paramedics were coming all the time trying to revive me, but I was just hanging out.
That's such old hat, isn't it? It's like you wake up and you're like, "Hey, Larry," and you're like, "Dead again." You know, it's like, okay.
And back
But
to the
it,
mental hospital.
yeah, well, and again, though, it's like, you go through all of this, and it's part of the human trauma, if you will, the here on earth part of it. Um, but I think it's really amazing that like you were able to recount this. That's where I think the rubber hits the road. I think sometimes people have,
Most people don't survive it.
you see where I'm
Um,
going with this. Yeah.
yeah, most people commit suicide.
Oh boy.
So that's what kind of makes my experience rare because I didn't. I mean, I thought about it. Of course, suicide's very easy because you're interdimensional, so you don't really see it as a. It's like just stepping over there. Go there.
Yeah.
But I did. I did spend time in Colombia with a group of shamans, and they had said I was one of the worst cases they'd seen of of fracture.
Yeah.
And so they worked with me for several weeks, and it was kind of, for them it was kind of a miracle because they hadn't seen anyone that fractured. They usually commit suicide before they get to them.
Yeah, and I know TC's jumping on here, but first of all, I want to congratulate you and say I'm sorry at the same time for being being that most difficult thing. TC, go ahead.
I really admire that, the way in which you explain that, because you are speaking to a place that a lot of us are from when we get our first like experience, be it like with astrology or with shamanism or spirit, that we're like, what the hell was that? Like, we're like,
Oh yeah.
what just happened? And we try to like, sit there and say, well, maybe the radio was too close to my head and I just got a zap, or geez, it happens every week, maybe I gotta like change up my schedule so it doesn't happen the same time. But I think it's also vitally important, one of the things that you said about how like you're open and honesty about like being put into mental institution.
Mhm.
Because we've come across so many students recently that have just been like, they were pigeonholed into, oh, well, it's anxiety. Oh, it's depression. Oh, it might be schizophrenia because you hear these voices, and sweetheart, they don't occur. And they like pat you on the head and, give you
Yeah.
some medicine and say, oh, that'll take care of it. And you're just like, no offense, but when the turkey vulture is like sitting outside my house and staring at me, I think something else is going on. Or like one time, for example, I live on the second floor of a house. I had a female mallard duck. She flew into the tree and she just stared at me into my kitchen window, and I stared back at her, and we had this like little thing. And I talked to a number of people, like my brother-in-law who's a hunter. He's like, they don't go in trees. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I took a picture. I'm telling you what I saw. So I think that that's valuable, and just wonder if you could give any advice to people that are struggling with that, it's mental illness, when it's spirit.
Yes, I worked very hard on this topic after I got back to the third dimension because I was misdiagnosed as schizophrenic, bipolar, all the labels they put on you, and I made it my goal to change the narrative and conversation among psychiatrists because they miss it completely. And the manual that they use for psychiatric um, diagnosis is completely ignores this entire aspect. And so most of the work I did was in England. I was in a documentary, among others that were in this documentary. And I also worked here in my community to raise the awareness that people were not mentally ill, that they were having spiritual awakenings. And that we were, by giving them medication, we were making the situation worse. And then by diagnosing them, they would get stuck into these really horrific pharmaceutical plans to get them better, which do not work with spiritual awakening. So I raised a lot of awareness about this. Unfortunately, most of the psychiatrists don't have the training to deal with that. That's why people usually end up with me. In fact, I have a lot of clients in mental hospitals in England, just because they don't get it. They don't know what to do for them. And so my advice is find a shaman, because it's not, shaman is trained in this, and in the old days, if you had in the tribe, if you saw someone like yourself who's like, the Mallard Duck's here and I'm talking to him and I'm doing all these things and I can see this and I'm having this experience. Well, the shaman would go, oh my gosh, we're wonderful. Come into my teepee. You're going to be the next shaman in our tribe. And everyone's like, wow, they would say poor thing, because it was never a good thing to be a shaman. No one wanted to be the shaman in those tribes. But if at least there was someone who got it. And so then you would go and you train under them. You were in a safe place. They'd feed you even when you were in, in total, out of your body or whatever. So someone was there to take care of you. Well, we don't have that. Now, why does that, why would that just stop happening to the human being? It happened then. Why wouldn't it happen now? It's the same thing. So the problem is we just don't have the way of managing that. They do it in India. You go to an ashram and you live and you go through your, spiritual experience. You have support. The problem is in our society, you go straight to mental hospitals. And that's really not the best place to take someone like that. They have a gift and they need the support to develop that gift.
Yeah, and Lori, it's there's always, when I sometimes think one of the most powerful things is when you get a bunch of light workers together that have their journey together and they work together, how much it really kind of symbolizes. And what I made part of my work is speaking to psychology students, PhD candidates, about ADHD. And about how it's, kind of this knee-jerk reaction to say pill, 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 and it doesn't have an exit strategy, which is frightening. There isn't that dynamic. I mean, I've spoken at Ivy League, schools about specifically you have to integrate the energy into this. I mean, listen, somebody's wiring may be off. They may need medication. I have that position for the reasons that I've seen cases where it's not a spiritual thing, that it is, okay, the wiring's not there.
Yeah, and I'm not against, and I want to make sure your readers don't, I'm not against medication to keep you in a safe place. If you're
100%.
completely psychotic, I think you need medication.
Sure,
But
you need to get from point A to point B.
It's not the cure. Mm-hmm.
Right. And one of the points of emphasis that I always say is, if you're, if you don't evaluate that there is the harmful benefit, the benefit harm analysis that every doctor goes through, it's the pros and cons, like, right down to, we're going to do heart surgery and this is a really serious surgery, but you need to do it because of A, B, and C. A perfectly healthy person isn't going through heart surgery. So, it's just like, did they go through all the steps to determine if it's an actual illness or if it's the most convenient method? And when you're just, handing out prescriptions that, you get into the whole dialogue of pharmaceuticals and, the money and, all that conspiracy stuff that has legs because you just simply don't pay attention to it. I applaud you for taking that approach, because I think it's actually the healthy, as we grow into this conscious state, and we're all going through this conscious state, whether we're resistant to it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, we're barreling towards a time where we are going to make better decisions because we say, do I really need to take this pill? And, so I applaud you in that, because I think that's a really key thing to.
Well, how I got out of the psychiatric world was my psychiatrist. I was telling him what was going to happen the next day.
Oh, do tell. We love a good prediction around here. Go ahead. So
I was telling him, I said, I said, doctor, tomorrow I want you to leave your house 5 minutes late because there's going to be an accident on that corner out there. And he's like, writing it down. Well, everything started to come true.
Wow.
And so after about a month, he was like, he looked at me and he goes, you shouldn't be here. And I said, really? He says, no. And he said, I can't help you. This is a spiritual issue. And thank God he did at that moment. And I said to him, well, what do I do with it? Because I didn't even know where to go. And he said, call Deepak Chopra.
Hey, good advice. Did you get a hold of him?
No, I called him. I did. I really called. So I want to talk to Deepak Chopra. My psychiatrist said I need to talk to him. Of course, they're like, yeah, right. But they did. They were very kind. They did give me one of his teachers in Sedona. And so I came and met actually Sarah McLean.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's
Mhm.
fantastic.
So I really admired him. In fact, in my memoir, I patted him on the back because it takes a lot for a psychiatrist to say, I can't, I shouldn't be treating you.
Validation is the best medicine. It truly is. It's like, I have that, I have that discussion a lot of times with students where they're like, these things keep happening to me. And I'm like, okay, well, seek the validation, seek the truth in it. In other words, if you have the gut feeling of like, okay, this is going to happen. And sometimes spirit comes to us in the most extreme ways. So you pay attention to it. Like there's an accident that's going to happen or whatever the case may be. But by and large, you can find many validations that aren't as harmful or aren't, don't have a trauma to it, if you will. And when they start to piece that together, it ends up being an amazing moment for them because they're like, oh my gosh, it's right here in front of me. And I think that's what I've been experiencing. I saw it in, I see it in students, and, TC has certainly seen it and gone through it. And this is, for me, I wanted to create a space where I went through kind of similar to what you went through, totally different stories, so forth and so on. But I wanted to create a space where people could actually have dialogue about this, a safe space,
Mm-hmm.
a place where you could say, like, I just had this, and, I say this all the time, you're not crazy,
Mm-hmm.
right out of the gate. So yeah, I really appreciate that for sure. TC?
I just wanted to ask you, after that amazing journey that you went through, and thank
Right.
God that the psychiatrist was like, yeah, you need to leave. How does one come to terms that shamanism is it for them out of all the possibilities of spirit and spirituality and modalities that are out there? How many animals does it take, or is there a set, like, what kinds of animals need to be constantly in your path to say hello? Or is it just like you just start getting this, maybe this is for me? Like, what, maybe speak through what your path was?
I think people are called to it. I don't think I know people maybe don't want to hear that sometimes, but I don't think it's a weekend course kind of thing. I just feel like something similar to like what happened to me occurs, and it's just like you're pulled into something like that, or you just have an immediate affinity to just work in that way. Now, I do not suggest having anyone go through what I did. It's not the way to be a shaman. I mean, it's very difficult. It's in fact, lightning shamans, which they call people like me, are very rare. So what happened is very rare. But there's other ways to be called that are not so tumultuous and that can be, a learning process. So I always encourage people to, embrace those types of things that happen. But no spirits, no shaman. And so if you don't have a relationship with a group of people or beings, and if you don't build that relationship, then you can't be a shaman. No spirits, no shaman.
I love that statement. It's kind of, I remember getting into a conversation that was a check and refund to a student that was a self-proclaimed atheist. She's like, I don't believe in anything. And I go, if you're an atheist and you're trying to communicate with dead people, you're kind of, yeah, I have no primer. I have nothing to help you with. How did you adopt that philosophy? The no spirit, no shamanism. Was that something that you learned along in the path, or is that just an observation that you're like, because to me, you're kind of knocking it out of the park with that statement. Yeah. How did you get there to that?
Well, first of all, I was initiated by 4 Jaguar spirits and 13 ancestral Mayan spirits. So
Mm.
all the work, all the learning, everything I learned and everything I've become at this stage, I was taught by them. Now, I did take some shamanic classes, but I did it mostly for perspective and
Right.
just kind of getting a template of what. And I worked with Michael Harner. He's passed away now, but and Alicia, one of his closest students, and it was mostly just for them to explain what was happening. Because they would tell me what to do, but I had already been taught that. So it was mostly just a better perspective of what it was. Also, mentors, I think, are extremely important in this world. And I had a woman who was a psychic and just one of the world's finest psychics on the planet. And she was, a huge part of my understanding. And then a colleague of hers was the 3rd generation Haitian shaman in her family, and she was also a teacher for me. So I think that if for someone who, there's a lot of people who call themselves shamans, and I just feel that it's way more than that. I think that it almost requires, it's almost like an initiation process. And so I'm not discounting some people's stories, because I know some of them have been just as, amazing. But I think that there's just a lot, it's a lifetime dedication after it happens. You're called. You never can be the same again.
Do you think that sometimes people call themselves shamans because they want to identify with something? Or, I find this all the time. People call themselves mediums because they want the title, and they have some ability, but they don't go all the way. They don't do the work. Do you find
Well,
that in
it requires
shamanism?
a tremendous amount of time and effort.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's I literally, I probably spent 6 hours a day in meditation for a year.
Yeah.
And it's that deep connection. It's being able to travel between the worlds effortlessly. It's being able to receive the messages at the highest vibrational level for the people that you're working with. It's developing um, this very high integrity relationship with the spirit world, so that what you're working with is really helping people and is really supporting their journeys in that way. And what was interesting is my group is very high tech, and a lot of people think it's very indigenous. It's funny. I kind of expected that when I saw the 13 ancestral beings. I thought this is going to be kind of ancestral like. But later on, I came to find that the level of technology that they had was extraordinary. And I was the biggest frustration they had, because I couldn't figure out what they were trying to show me. I had no perspective. But so about 4 years ago, I asked them, I said, I need help because I could see things in the body. I could see any disease or illness, but I didn't know the name of it. And
Very, very Edgar Casey of you. Keep going.
and I was like, and so I said, I need you guys to give me some kind of program or something I can work with, so that I can work, I can bridge the gap between the language. And so about 3 months later, literally, just something just fell in my lap. It's a program I use, and it usually requires like 7 weeks of training, and I learned it in 7 minutes. So, and I'm not a high tech
Of course.
person, but I just had already used the program probably on some level. So I combine the shamanism with the quantum science and the tools that are out there, so that I can be more effective in actually having I can tell you you have a parasite. I know the name of the parasite that has 25 letters in it, and I
Yeah.
can tell you which one it is and give you the Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So it's working with them in that way, that's even more, it's being open and being able to say, okay, how can I take this gift and then combine it with other technologies and work with the spirits in that way. But had I not had a relationship with the spirit world and that we weren't working together, how do you have a partnership? How do you put anything together? And I guess maybe being an entrepreneur my whole life, I'm used to just working with others in that sense. So I think it's vital to, when you have a gift, to realize, first of all, the gift is coming from your relationships with this other world. And then how do you optimize that? Because as a human, you have the best expertise of that group. And they want you to say, what's it like? How can we help the humans? And that's where I come in to say, well, they're not going to get that, or this isn't going to work on a physical level or whatever. And that beautiful combination makes it a very powerful healing and possibility for others.
Lori, I wanted to touch on something that you had said, because I was going to ask you about like your best practices that you do on a daily basis to help hone in on your messages. And one thing you said was you meditate for 6 hours. Like, you are awesome. You are my spirit animal right there. Is there anything else that you, do in a day or within a certain time frame to kind of get yourself into the swing of things?
Well, the other ingredient of being a shaman is no fear. And that's why the jaguars were my teachers, because the best shaman has absolutely no fear. You cannot heal someone if you feel fearful or if you have doubt. And, jaguar, if you think about the jaguar, it walks through the jungle, pretty low profile, and the jungle is pretty thick. And so since it has no real predator, it just goes right through the grass. It's not worrying about what it might find. There's no fear. And so I knew that I couldn't do this work if I had doubts about my capacity to do it or any fear about what I was seeing or doing. And when I talk about getting rid of fear, that was horrific to try to overcome. Because just driving a car, you have fear. It's the natural thing that you need to drive a car.
Yep.
And when I would drive my car, I was vibrating so high that I was constantly in accidents because my fear was manifesting everything around me.
Wow.
And I was such a high vibration after the light. So I couldn't drive, because whatever little inch of fear that would come in, it would create something tragic for me. I also could see beings just like I'm seeing you right now. They were solid. Yeah. And that was a problem because I couldn't tell if I was driving my car, if I was killing someone or not.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with a student. They're like, they showed up right in front of me and I slammed on the brakes, and then I'm like, okay, well, was it real? Was it for them? Why do you feel that they were showing themselves?
But you can't live.
Yeah, it's almost as if we actually have I've worked with people that have this sincere fear of driving all the time. And when they talk to a psychiatrist, by the way, full circle conversation, they're like, okay, this is an undue fear. It's irrational. It's, but when you explain to them, well, it's because I see something there, and I'm kind of like that. I myself, when I have shared experiences like that, I literally kind of make it into a game. I'm like, hey, how you doing? Hey, how are you? And sometimes I'll kind of do a quick blink, like, is that somebody, like, get out of the road? Like, sometimes it's like, I kind of go down that, road with it. But I think one thing that you were talking about with the teachers, I think was very important. And this is a point of emphasis I always like to point out. You talked about many teachers. You learned different aspects and different perspectives. That I think is critically important as you grow. The other aspect of that too was how you integrated that into each one of them. And sometimes, as we learn, sometimes one teacher says, orange is sacral forever, and then the next one says, well, this is kind of a moody red, and, and we get caught up in the technical side of it. And I think sometimes we search for those things, and I'm actually getting to a point of fear. Sometimes we are afraid that what we're hearing, we have to re-indoctrinate ourselves, or we fear that we can't move forward, or we have fear that, we might not understand why we have fear. We just simply have it, and that's why psychologists is like, well, this is an irrational fear. The reality is, though, is that fear is some people use it as a motivator, like nothing's going to stop me, I'm not going to be afraid of anything, and we talk over fear. But I think that the people that are truly enlightened face their fears. They face, we just had an analogy in one of our consciousness classes where, you've got to get through the big pile of what's in front of you. And are you going to look at it all day, or are you going to go straight through it? Like, you're going to be affected by it one way or the other. It's all about strategy. What are some of the strategies that you've used with this, with your fear, to overcome it and really kind of manage day to day?
Well, I believed through the initiation that my survival depended on it, because I was manifesting so quickly. And for example, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine let me live with her. I could not live alone. I didn't know what was real and what was not. And so she went through it with me, and we would be driving. She would drive because I couldn't drive, and there would be police cars, like on all four sides of the car. And she had been around me long enough to see what was happening. She said, "Lori, what are you thinking?" And I said, "Well, I was thinking you're speeding." And she's like, "Would you please stop it? There's 4 cops." So I realized at that time, I said, wow, my fears are creating this reality.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew that was my big initiation, was to realize that if I didn't overcome that, I was going to be in trouble all the time.
Yeah.
And so since I lived on the fourth dimension for almost 2 years, I can tell people, I have a huge perspective on where they're going wrong in the third, because I know exactly how it works to live in those higher energies. And so I learned, how I manipulate it. But one of the biggest lessons the Mayans told me that was a relief in a way, because I started to try to be 100% all the time. In other words, if I just have no fear, and in other words, whatever emotion or whatever it is, or whatever was going on, if I was just 100%, I could get through the world. But the problem with that was that it's impossible as a human being. Our bodies can't manage it. Our experiences can't manage it. So I realized, and they finally told me, they said, no, it doesn't have to be 100. It just has to be 51%. And that was a huge change for me, because I thought, okay, 51, I could handle.
Right.
And so, like, for example, if you wanted, let's say, people talk about, negative thoughts, and then they're like, think positive. Well, if I was thinking it had to be 100%, and they said, no, as long as you're over 50, then you're on the other side of that, and then you won't be drawing things into you. In other words, you're completely out of duality. So you're right in the center. Wow. So if you go over that into more positive thoughts, then you are just, dragging more positive to you. But that was a huge revelation. And when I finally understood that, I said, well, I could handle that. And so I learned to just make sure that my life is always over 50%. And then after, the longer you do that, then you start to realize that it just becomes a way of being. So it's not something you're trying to do all the time. It's just a way of being. And so then you're just now walking in those higher vibrations all the time. And then you build from there. So anyone who's thinking, wanting advice about that, it's really just, if you can just more than half of the time be a positive human being, and then build from that foundation, then the process of manifestation and things like that on those higher levels is much more, you're much more at ease, and things come to you, and you're financially more abundant, and all these things that we all look for when we call a guru.
Yeah, I think that's amazing perspective because you do, and again, taken from the corporate world, it's like you're conditioned to be 100%. You're conditioned to,
Mhm.
lead, follower, get out of the way. Like, oh God, if I heard that one more time in the corporate world. But I think this is really good advice because, and then what you're also talking about is that fear has its place. It's 49 or less,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
it's there. It acknowledges it. And it's, and I say this all the time, it's not all good and it's not all bad. Even the things that you think are the best thing ever have something that's not the best in it. And the things that you think are gosh awful are not all bad. There's some purpose into that.
Yeah, and I
You
think
know?
and I think the other thing that I get a lot from my clients and people is that, and you probably get this question all the time, is what am I supposed to do?
If
And
if I had a
and I
dollar,
asked my guys that like 5,000 times, and they were like, "Okay, let's think about this, Lori.
right?
You got hit by light. you we threw you out of your body how many times? You went through this whole thing and everything, and now you want us to tell you like what you're supposed to do."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, but am I this? Am I that? And am I this?" And they said, "Lori, it's all about being. It's not about doing." And they said, if you could see what you look like on the field, when you see someone, when you talk to someone, when you go through the grocery store and buy an apple, if you could see the impact that you have because of the work that you've done, you would say that's way more than enough.
Do you see where you want to go with this one?
Well, I think that there's something to be said though for kind of that, oh, how should we put it? Um, that sort of like innocent lack of direction.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I could pop in with my story of my crow here. Um,
Perfect spot.
it took me like about maybe 6 or 7 classes during the intuitive development series before I even spoke up about this because it was so weird. But my son had a sleepover, he had a friend over, and the whole night the kid didn't sleep. He was wide awake and he was like, there was clawing in the wall. And I'm like, it's a new place. I get it, but there's no clawing of anything anywhere. Nothing can get in. And what had happened was a crow had gotten in our attic and crawled down through the wall into a side wall and into a storage wall and popped itself in our little storage back porch that had a window that was sealed off and covered in plastic and had one door, which was to the kitchen, no other in or out. And so like the next morning I went to go get some food off the porch and I opened and there's this bird and I'm like, oh, and I closed the door and I was like, oh no. And I tried for days to call animal control. I honestly didn't know you could take like a towel and wrap it around it. I didn't want to hurt the bird. I didn't want to do any harm to it. But so I brought it water. I was like, here, birdie, here's some bread, like tried to feed it, tried to give it some water. Um, the landlord and my husband took care of it. I know the bird passed because I opened the door and I saw it on the floor and I was just like, oh my, and they wouldn't tell me that it passed. They were trying to avoid that. And I was like, I saw the bird. So when I brought it to class, they were like, anybody have any interesting animal experiences? And I'm like, oh yeah, like I had this happen. And like everyone in the class just like their jaws dropped open because I was that person that was like, yeah, spirit guides, sure. Yeah, angels, whatever. Astrology, I know what I am. Like, like animals, they're around. Like, just had this kind of whatever, and people were just like, holy crap, like, that's huge. And I looked at them and I said, well, what am I supposed to do with it? I didn't, like you, had no context of that was big. That's a sign. I was like, I knew it meant something. I just was like, well, I'll take a couple classes to see if I can figure out what that means. But I wasn't like, I have this huge context of that means this, that, and the other thing. And that happened like 2 years ago. So like, especially during quarantine, I started going on more walks. And like, I'm almost like a season with certain birds, like turkey vultures were all around me. Like, I stopped and saw one and I was like, can I take your picture? And it just flew and I got beautiful pictures and, taught my son. I was like, you just ask it if you can take pictures. And like more recently, I've had blue herons around. This morning, actually, I saw a loon in the water. I haven't seen a bird in the water for weeks. And I look out this morning and here's the loon, pops his head up, looks around, goes down, comes back up, looks around. And I was like, okay, hello, loon. I haven't seen you in a while. But it's just, to me, it's like, okay, so I'm getting a lot of this animal energy. I'm aware. I see the dragonflies. I see the birds. I even hear them sometimes, like I'll have the window open and all you can hear is the crows cawing, or I now can discern like between like red-winged blackbird and a blue jay and a cardinal and the crows. And so I'm like, all right, this is, where do we go with this? So I don't know where a question was in there. I somehow lost it, but like what do you do when you're getting that? Because my concern is like there's so many people that are just like, oh, well, it's energy, but there's really nothing to it for you. Like, how do you discern like what is something that you're like, I think I'm getting enough communication that this is it, versus someone that's just like, maybe that's not for you, kind of thing.
Well, everything is a message. And when I was in the fifth, even the letter on a billboard was a message for me.
Keep going.
Everything, and the thing is, this was the chaos. When you're so far into the fifth, that there's everything around you is telling you something. The interesting thing about animals is that they have legs and they're mobile and they can come to you. So that's what makes them different than the letter on a word on a billboard. My probably the most profound experience that I had was I was here with my mentors, just not far from here. This was almost 9 years ago, and these are magical women. These are women that are just magical. And so they were out with their tuning forks, and they were tapping into nature, and they were teaching me to work with nature. And they said, we're going to bring you a gift today. And so I had a Herkimer diamond, because I work a lot with crystals as well. And they said, put it down. So that I put it down. And then they just did their magic, which they later taught me. And all of a sudden this hawk goes down the creek and land, and the branch of the tree is literally right here, and the hawk is here. So it would have, if you took a picture of me, the hawk would have almost looked like it was on my shoulder.
Wow.
And so I realized, boy, I can bring animals to me. I can bring, and then they taught me that. And of course, I would, at my lake where I lived in El Salvador, I'd bring the big, we call them the garzas, the big white birds. I would bring them to me. They'd land right in front of me. And of course, my caretaker would just be freaking out because, but it was almost like a Harry Potter movie.
Wow.
We were playing with animals. And, but when so I realized, that they're very connected to our energy. We can call them in, we can bring them, they'll react. They're also great messengers. And so, when I decided to write the book, The Shaman's Guide to Power Animals, what I did was this is another little piece of this, but when an animal comes to you, unless you can hear them, which I can, um, most people can't. So when I wrote the book, I tried to ask the animals, what are they trying to tell us when they come?
Mm.
Because it's not always cut and dry. In other words, you can go to my book and find out, what the meanings, a lot of the meanings are. And like the first part of every animal, I talk about what was the meaning for all the cultures around the world. What did this animal mean for the African tribes, for the in Japan, what did it mean in India? So there's the cultural part, but then the last part of it, I actually channeled the animal and asked them, when you would go to see a human, what would you tell them? If you show up, what are you trying to tell them?
Right.
And that's the information that's in the book. So, but I like to always tell people, keep it open, because it's not set in stone. It's like, okay, I saw a cardinal today, that means that. I use the animals, I might look at what's going on in my life at that time and say, okay, what's going on that this animal would come? I might read my book to remind me what they told me. For example, it's very hard to find rentals in Sedona, and I was looking for a rental over a year ago. And I know that a mouse is great for finding a house. And so I called in Mouse because I knew it would be difficult. And I said, Mouse, we need to find a house. And so I got in my car and I just started driving around. And there was one particular neighborhood I really wanted to be in, but I never saw anything online. Nothing ever came up. And we were driving by and there was this little tiny sign, I mean, the size of a mouse almost to read, that said for rent. And
Wow.
I said, there's your house. And so within 20 minutes, I had a rental at the perfect price, what I could afford and everything else. So, using them use their skills, which are a lot more honed than ours, can be very helpful throughout your life. And with the book, what I did is I put like a cross reference. So for example, you can go back in here and see like, okay, what are you can look at the powers that they have.
Mm.
So you can go through here and say, okay, what do I need right now? Well, I need to relax. I'm just so stressed out. I need to relax. So you can go through here and you can look through and see, okay, what would be the best, animal to help me with relaxing? Well, I look here and it's sloth.
Nothing wrong with that.
So, so
I've
it's
been
like,
accused of that
okay,
one before.
so maybe it's calling in sloth and saying, teach me what it's like to actually. And it was interesting when I channeled sloth. Um, I had someone taking notes of all of my channeling.
Mm.
I didn't just record it because I wanted them to ask the animal questions. But it was funny when the sloth came in, I spoke so slowly. And she was laughing at me because she's like, Lori, it's taking me like 45 minutes to channel the sloth.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
going, because the sloths,
Mm.
rhythm is pretty slow. So that's it's a great way to use them, that way.
Yeah, and
And
just as a side note, if you look below in the description, you'll actually see a link to get a copy of that book. And I like how well organized it is. I really like the different worldview perspectives. In my background, I think worldviews are actually a really critical thing for us to look at in our root to not only help us kind of heal where we're at, but also help us grow. So I love that dynamic to it, that you do go cross-culturally. I also really enjoy the idea that when as you were just kind of showing, like it's an easy to follow grid. It's an easy to follow, thing. And I think that, when you jump off the shoulders of, the Ted Andrews of the world and what have you, you honor their work. And then in your path, you go, oh my gosh, I wish I had this. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to create this. That's why I wanted that.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned as a teacher. It's like, I always wanted a bunch of classes where I looked at everything and I learned different aspects of everything. Lo and behold, I created a course series called Intuitive Development, and it appeals to the right amount of people. And the other dynamic that I really liked what you were saying is that you took the time. You didn't just write about it. You didn't just take 14, you didn't read it in Ted's book and then here and then here and then go, here you go.
No, my rule was, I
Yeah.
love Ted's book. I used it for years. My rule was to never open an animal book while I wrote it, because I wanted it to be from them. I didn't want, and the Mayans, when they initiated me, they would not let me watch television. They chose the books that I could read because they were downloading so much information and they didn't want it to be tainted. And I thought that was very interesting. So, and I know you as a medium probably know that, anything can taint a reading if you
Yeah.
know anything about it beforehand.
I was just asked this, and I think it was meant to be a compliment. But what, I think they didn't really realize it, and they kind of cut tongue in cheek. They were like, "Did you look me up? Did you Google me?" And I laughed because I'm like, not only did I not do that, I never like it. Just ugh. That thought or idea, is kind of sideways. But I know this from the creative perspective. When I sit down to do music or a CD, I now resist. What I used to do is like, oh, I'm going to listen to these 3 or 4 things and kind of take pieces from it or whatever. And then I started to realize, I'm like, I don't want that influence. I mean, I have it in my memory banks. I've heard it before. But now the fun of it is going, okay, I got a vibration from it. Now I want to go create that vibration. It's not the notes, it's the feel, it's the whatever. So I appreciate that tenfold, because I think that's
And I think
really
that, as you probably
asking.
learned in becoming a medium, the validation is like a high,
Yeah, it
because
is.
when you have no knowledge of something, and I just can't tell you how many things I've come up with,
Yeah,
over the years. But when you tell someone this and this and this and this, and it is spot on, and it is
yep.
like so revealing and so helpful, and maybe one sentence changes their life, there's no way I know that.
That is
And
100% our goal, isn't it?
and that yeah and that validation for me is so important. So why would I want to know? I would never have any validation of my
Yeah,
gift.
yeah. I mean, it's one thing to accept that maybe I'm not your messenger,
Hmm.
to be like, okay, well, I was just off today or whatever the case may be. I wasn't off. I just wasn't your messenger. And then to have a fulfillment of, oh my gosh, I really helped you in that way. I mean, I joke around all the time where, I always present everything with humor, because I really think that the vibration of humor
Oh,
is
it's
so
wonderful.
much
Yeah.
greater
In fact,
than.
shamans, they to raise the vibration in circles, they all start laughing.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of my influences into that decision making. That in a little, known Disney movie about monsters that they seem to get angry with me every time I bring it up, so I won't. But the idea of the antithesis of the fear is the love and the joy. So if you're able to laugh at it, and one of the jokes that I always say, like I'll say something and the person will be like, "Wow, that's spot on. How did you know that?" And I kind of like, I'm like, "What? That was right? Oh my gosh, I got it right. I do this for a living. I'm surprised." It's
Hmm.
so I joke around like that, but it's genuine, and how you just described it is spot on, because you really do. But the euphoria isn't, and this is just in my own growth. Once upon a time, there was ego attached to it, and I'm like, I'm great, I'm good at this. But what I was trying to do was shed all of the old stuff, of the performance, when I used to have my name on a chart, and depending upon how well I did that week, I was up or down.
Hmm.
So, there was that little bit of part that I had to let go. And then I started to realize where now I look at them as mile markers, if you will. When somebody gives me that
Right. Yeah.
validation,
Validation of learning, and then it gives you confidence to use your gift. You're
it opens up the
more
next thing.
open. Hmm. Yeah.
It opens up the next thing.
Mhm.
Very cool. So I'm glad you were able to bring up the book there. TC, any other questions about that?
No, I was just thinking back to, I took a vacation up in the Thousand Islands near Canada a couple weeks ago, and I actually had been dabbling with like oracle cards, and I had a spirit animal oracle deck, and I had done a spread for myself, a medicine wheel spread, And I wound up getting like the snow leopard and the sea turtle and the goose and the otter and the squirrel. And when 2 of the 5 had appeared to me, like a squirrel and a goose, I'm like, well, we're near Canada, so this is typical. But the last morning I was there, because we were on a kind of a floating house. It was pretty cool. I had gone on a little walk in the morning and come back, and there was an otter on the deck, which I had never seen like in real life. This is like kind of like a little
That's awesome.
marina thing. So I just thought that was cool because you were talking about manifesting before. And I wanted to ask you, speaking of animals, what is your favorite spirit animal to work with?
They're all different. So it's kind of hard to choose one. I will say that probably the most profound experience I had writing the book was with the whale.
Mm.
To this moment, it brings tears to my eyes what happened. Because the whale took me into his family, and I was swimming with them for quite a while. And what I learned from the whale was something I don't even think I could teach it. It's something that just dropped in, and they have a lot to teach us. Whales have been here way before we have. They know a lot more about this planet than we do, and so I think using them as teachers, listening, maybe learning some of the little shamanic practices that I have in the book of how to communicate them with them, because the most profound teachings I've learned from animals, not from shamanic teachers.
The first shamanic journey I ever went on was to meet a spirit animal, and it was, and I came into that part of it very skeptic. Like I had ability, I've got a very classic background, had it my whole life. It presented itself in different ways, so forth and so on. And so I started to, explore this, and I went through the shamanic journey, and it was a whale turning its fin and basically telling me, follow it. So I love that that's part of your story, and I'm hearing parts of what it, and I didn't need to explain it. Everybody's like, oh, look up the meaning, look up the whatever. Even when I teach, tarot, when I'm talking about cards or oracles or that sort of thing, I still think we're the best conduit for what the meanings of the cards are. When I had that experience, it was I had never really journaled before. I'd written, I had some corny poetry, but I had never really felt the need to sit down and share what I had experienced until that whale came to me.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think that what the whale was saying was, like I literally kind of saw it kind of do the turn, and I'm getting the tail end of it. It was follow me. It was, you got to go this way. I'm showing you a direction. And I didn't understand it at first, but boy, I've got 15 pages of me going, am I chasing you? Are you turning your back on me? I mean, all of the fear aspects of it, as in like, are you showing yourself to say no, or are you showing yourself to say follow me? And that's the 51% right there.
Mm-hmm.
That you were talking about earlier. That was like 51% follow me, 49% turn my back on you.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was, to me, my reality became I chose the 51% of follow me,
Yeah.
So.
And it's they want to work with us. I the other experience I had with the whale was I was on a flight to Japan. I was going to Bali. There was no way I could get to Bali without going through Japan. I tried for months. And so I was on the plane, and I was crossing the Pacific Ocean, and then all of a sudden all these whales came into the plane. And I was looking around at everyone going, does other people see these whales?
Mm-hmm.
And so they started talking to me, and they said, we have work for you to do in the Osaka airport.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So I got there, and they finagled my flights to make sure I had plenty of time to do the work that they wanted vibrationally. And it was for me to stand in front of certain towers. And I was they were using my body to send vibrational waves out over the ocean. And so for 8 hours, I walked around the Osaka airport saving the whales, I guess. They put me in these towers. They put me in certain towers to stand by. And so they'd say, stand there for 20 minutes, and then they'd move this energy through me out into the water. And so they can use,
who's instructing you to do this?
so they can use you. I never
Right.
had that
So
experience.
you're talking about spirit, right?
Yeah, so they just
Okay.
would tell me, Lori, we need you to help us, and you need to stand there. And then they were doing stuff with the energy with me, and they just needed the human piece of that. So I just did what they told me, and of course I couldn't get on my flight until I finished it anyway.
Wow.
They were, they had. I could tell they knew about the radar. They knew exactly how to get me right at the place I needed to be, and my flight was going to come on their schedule.
Wow.
So yeah, they're very powerful, and they're very much trying to heal our planet. So I felt honored to be chosen to help them.
That's fantastic. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. So, TC, you were looking for an animal, and she gives you, she went in an experience sort of way, and I think it's really cool that when you start to pay attention to this, and I remember this, even when she came in, she goes, "I got a story to tell," and she's talking about the crow being in the attic and everything else. Um, I remember that she stayed very clear with, like, there's a message here. I don't know what it is, but there's a message here. And I think that those are kind of bookend stories where it's like, I think a lot of people have experiences, that TC talked about initially. Like there's an initiation, like
Yes,
aha
something,
moment.
and it
And
always happens when the animal does something very strange. In other
oh
words,
gosh, yeah.
very out of character.
Like a duck
Um,
in a tree, for example.
right. Yeah.
Like,
That's usually when it gets your attention, because then you're like, they don't do that. And
Right,
you start to question that. Yeah. Hmm.
right. Yeah, I think whether it's a duck in a tree or, there are things that are kind of like, indicative to people. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, Lori, but Herkimer diamonds are literally in our backyard here.
I know. In
Yeah.
fact, I'm doing some work with them this month. I'm working on the root chakra, and I use the Herkimers for recording future visions of, if you're trying to manifest something in your future. They're very good about keeping you can actually walk around with your future in the Herkimer. I like them for that.
That's amazing. Well, I want to talk to you about about your teaching and what you do. I know you have a retreat coming up in Sedona in 2021. I can't believe I'm talking about 2021 right now, but
Mm,
but I think like most of us are just kind of done with 2020 as it is. But 2021 in April out in Sedona. What can somebody expect, or do you want to describe a little bit about what this is? And one of the aspects I really like about it is that it's limited. You don't have 1,000 people there. We keep
right.
it very
Yeah.
kind of tight for the learning purposes.
Hmm. Yeah. It's total transformation. I use a lot of the shamanic skills that I learned. It's fun. It's not, we have a lot of fun. In fact, we just finished one, COVID or no COVID,
I,
because
I, I
because
applaud that.
I work on everyone's immune system before they get there, so everyone's protected vibrationally. But we work with vibe beds. We put people on beds. We put them into sound and light therapies, and then we do shamanic journeys with them. It's a high vibe, multi visual and multi vibrational experience that it's very hard
Yeah,
to recreate in your
it, it,
home.
it it sounds like it's almost like, and I want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like using, a ayahuasca without using that.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
So we
so
don't
it's,
we don't use it. I don't believe in it. I believe everyone can have um, these experiences without it. I did.
I
So
think
it's
that's awesome.
teaching people how to use their own the chemicals in their body. In fact, we spend actually part of the classes on that. And then we use it's very off the beaten track. Sedona is a very touristy place. So there's lots of, folklore. But I work with people who are very authentic and know about the vortex world. The vortexes that I show you, you would never see if you came to a vortex tour
Wow.
because they're mapped out. I based it on the Lemurian map. And so I take people literally back to Lemuria, which is what is the underlying city that's here. So you go back to Lemuria, and
Wow.
then we usually we do rebirth ceremonies in the indigenous wells, and we really, we mix kind of modern with old Lemurian, with
Mm.
ancient, with all of it, and then we usually go and watch UFOs.
Yeah, listen, why not throw in a little CE5 in the middle of all
Yeah, we
this, right?
always have. In fact, we had this time, the last time we did it, a couple of weeks ago, we had an entire fleet come over.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Which
Did
was,
you, not that I need validation on this, but did you record it? Are you part of a
I
CE5
have
group?
pictures. In fact, it was really wild because Tom Dongo, he's one of the world's most famous
Yeah.
validators of
Yeah.
UFOs. He's like, everyone sends their UFO pictures to Tom for the last 50 years.
I literally just watched the thing on YouTube about him.
Yeah. Well, he was in my yard. And so I
Of course
didn't
he
have to
was.
question whether it was a fleet. I just said, Tom, I just showed
Yeah,
him the
here,
picture
here you go.
on my,
Well,
he goes, yes, Lori, of course it is.
and I think this is also something, and I like to point this out for people on their journey because again, we're trying to connect the dots for people that like, okay, they're not crazy, and there is something here. I love that you use and migrate together the idea of the older spiritual pieces of it along with the scientific pieces of
Mhm.
it. And you had mentioned, the light therapy, and I think that's the aspect that is actually led through a medical doctor, correct? Or
Yeah,
psychologist.
he's a doctor. And these are, quantum specialists that work with me. So they come and they work with me during the retreat. So it's what it is like a really high powered shamanic experience without ayahuasca.
Yeah, and that's it's funny. I've met people that are just some people become shamans for the drugs. Like it's horrible to say it like that, but they like, oh, I heard this mind altering experience, so I'm going to do shaman work. Okay, all right. Like that's there's something broken for you to have that train of thought, but how much time do we have? And and I really like that this is really kind of a true alternative to get the same style results,
Mhm.
not artificially, but rather more naturally. I mean,
Right. Mhm.
whether you want to
And
kind of
also, you need to have experienced people with you with that.
very
So
true.
it's we are very responsible about it, and people are, some people have never even had any kind of experience when they come and have
Mm,
amazing experiences, but they're very high vibrational, so they're
yeah.
really of the light. They're just beautiful. I mean, people just have these like amazing things that happen to them, so they're not the kind of drama that I had as I was. It's I know how to
Thank
manage that
thank
better.
goodness you went through that experience. I mean, like you're
Yeah.
finding your purpose here with this. And, let us stand on on the shoulders of Ram Dass and, not beat our bodies up as we go through this or not,
Mhm.
let's let him kind of spearhead what he was supposed to and then say, okay, well, there's a better mousetrap. By the way, I
Mhm.
purposely
Yeah.
use that analogy
Well, and
there.
I learned a lot from Michael Harner. He was one of the first
Mhm.
Western men to do ayahuasca. And I asked Michael one time, I said, what do you think about this? Because it was the big thing and everyone was doing it. And I didn't see any reason to do it because I was interdimensional all the time. It didn't matter. And he says, Lori, I don't like it.
Wow.
He says that requires a tremendous amount of training and understanding
Yeah.
of the shamanic world before you jump into something like that. And I agree because I have had a lot of clients, mothers hauling their daughters up here saying my daughter's she's completely fractured
Yeah.
because she just did ayahuasca in Peru and she's a mess.
Wow.
Then I have the mental health issues. So I think it's very important in shamanism. You work with experienced people who know what they're doing, who can safely guide you into those places.
And I would consider you experienced in saying this is an alternative that works, because you did the research, you asked experts, you went through that, and I applaud that, because I think that's kind of this next level stuff where you start to, you take a step forward, and then you find the challenges with it, the people that are in it for the wrong reason, et cetera. And then you up your game, and then you start vibrating in a sense that you're just attracting the people that really want to heal. So in your own mantra, in your own work pattern, you want to do things that help other people. And I think that's fantastic. I'm going to add in the link as well, to your website, to all the classes that you have online. I think they're,
And I do a Mastering You class that starts in January. I do it every year.
Cool.
And it's really, it takes people through the health aspects of shamanism. It goes through the mental. We jump through the mind, body, spirit, then kind of getting people cleaned up, ready to, move into those higher levels of understanding and learning. And then we do have a group, it's kind of similar to like what you guys have, is, so we can say, I saw this, and everyone goes, whoa.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, what? We all need those groups. And so I applaud you for putting that together, because we need to be with like-minded people, because otherwise, we're questioning everything. We shouldn't be questioning everything. Everything comes to us with a purpose. And so having those people around you that validate what you're seeing, what you're doing, your path, is very helpful. It's the way to grow and move into a higher vibration.
That's fantastic. PC, another question? Never speechless.
No, I like have profound respect for that. It sounds like a class, something that would be, as I go through nursing school, something that I would love to learn about, to add into. I know like holistic medicine is its own thing, but even to know medically and have like sort of like a little bit of a background into something a little different that also helps heal is, I think, part of the process.
That's really, what I do now is mostly more medical intuition, and it's a huge frontier. There's so many possibilities. I have a lot of nurses as clients, who really enjoy the information, because they work on a different level, and more the physical, and so it's always very interesting for them to say, I had a client yesterday with breast cancer, and so I said, okay, let's talk about what causes breast cancer. So as we learned about the underlying causes and the things and the energies and what's the past life and the mother and all these other things, all of a sudden it just opened up a whole new world to this person to say, wow, I didn't realize that all these other levels, energetic levels, were playing a role in my diagnosis as well. So the deeper, a shaman will look at 7 energy levels to heal you. The doctor will look at 1, the physical. The psychiatrist looks at the mental. Very few people look at the spiritual, maybe church, but there's 5 other levels to heal someone.
Absolutely.
And so it's that part that's really interesting for some of the nurses that I have had in my programs, because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm always focused on what's the blood test say. And then there's so much more underlying that, and then it gives them a much broader view of really what it takes to heal somebody. So
I really like that broad view, because I mean, certainly being aware of a broader view to begin with is helpful. And like when I ask questions in class, and like sometimes they look at me, they're like, where is this coming from? Like, other students who maybe don't have that life experience. But then like, the professors are like, oh, well, we didn't think of that way. Because certainly I know I've done a lot of work with chakra and healing and aligning that, and know that energy as well as Reiki. So like, it's to me very interesting to like keep bringing, like adding layers, so to speak, but bring more things in to be able to be.
My biggest hope is people like you, young people like you, who start to integrate the other four levels of healing somebody, because that's when it becomes really powerful. And my last retreat, I had a nurse, and she was, studying, and the last night she came to me and she's like, I'm having this total revelation. I need to work on all seven levels. And I said, yes, that's what we need to get to. I want you to be a good nurse on the physical, but I want you to add all these other things. So when you see somebody, you can heal all of that person.
Absolutely. That's
not just that one.
like where I've been headed in thinking of that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, she had the same revelation.
Yeah, keep going. I mean, this is actually one of my favorite topics, because what I think we're headed towards, I've talked about, we're becoming conscious and all this other stuff. You're, when you meet a massage therapist that also works in energy, it's a different experience than somebody that just understands what they're supposed to do to your fascia and so forth and so on. It doesn't make them a bad massage therapist, but there's definitely a difference. When you work with medical doctors that are, that actually have that level of consciousness, they have a level of empathy, they have a level of understanding, and they're able to kind of understand, okay, how did you get there? Instead of doing a quick decision, which is actually judgment. I mean, when you hang your hat on one thing of what doctors do most, they literally judge you in that moment. They judge your symptoms, they judge, whatever conditions are present. But when they're able to kind of say, like, how do we get to the root of this? How do we get to the bottom of where you're at? Is this because you have an emotional eating thing, or is this because you have a thing, or whatever? Insert huge lexicon there. The consciousness, the medicine consciousness, I think, is going to be a major spearhead in the next coming years, sooner than you think, because what I think that a pandemic really brings forward is our fear, and everything that 5149, which, by the way, Lori, I'm going to thank you for teaching me that dynamic today.
That was my guides.
Well,
No
listen, I'm
spirit,
going to,
no shaman.
my guides honor your guides with that, because I needed to hear that today. I needed to hear that, because I am asked that all the time. Like, I'm afraid. Well, how afraid are you? What are you giving into? I
What
teach a
it does is it causes a psychosis in people who are in spiritual development, because they think that they're not perfect. They're always thinking that they're not enough, or they're not good enough, or whatever, because they have this thing that, I'll never manifest anything. I'll never, I have people who are in spiritual trauma from going to weekend things, because then they come home and they're not perfect. They
yeah.
said, I had this terrible thought. I just screwed up my entire life yesterday. So
Yeah.
it's helped a lot.
Have you had students come? I'll share this insight where, you have a student sign up for a class, and then they literally can only think in terms of pass fail.
Yeah.
And then you have to, like, sit them down and say, listen, if you're going to compare yourself to the person across the room, this isn't going to go well for you, because this is an individual internalization and understanding of where your path is going. And I think that is kind of that fractured piece of it, and I like that terminology for this, because you end up doing more damage than good. And as a teacher, we struggle with it, because you're like, okay, do I just start, do I just start saying, okay, you shouldn't be taking classes or whatever? But by and large, I think that there's an aspect to this that, like, as teachers, we're being challenged with this, because we're meant to be teachers in the moment for the real thing. I think someone like, TC, who's like going through nursing school and literally hearing these conversations and seeing these things, is on purpose. Truly on
Yes.
purpose, for all the reasons that you just said. We're associated with other nurses and other medical professionals that see consciousness as like the next step into this. And I
Yes.
think that's a really profound dynamic, that as much you're doing your role as a shaman to bring in the medical community, to bring them together. I applaud that. I think anyone worth their salt that really begins to understand this takes that, that beacon, and carries it forward with it. And, for me, I think that when you finally get yourself to a point where you can accept that medicine isn't good or bad, it just exists, and there are possible solutions and there are possible outcomes, and you integrate the idea of that mindfulness approach, that's actually how we change the world. That is
And I'll
literally
give
how
you
we
one
become
more
successful.
thing before we
Sure.
get off here that they told me that was probably, it was the number 2 profound thing.
Mm,
It's very simple. You can't believe anything in anything.
keep going.
And I asked them, I said, but there's some stuff I want to believe in.
Yeah.
They were like, no,
Mm,
because every belief is an opinion and creates duality. So I said, well, can you give me like a couple things that I could believe in?
give me a
He said,
primer.
and they said, yeah, we'll give you 2 things. First of all, you live on a planet where everyone wears clothing. And so you need to believe that you need to put your clothes on every day before you go out. And I said, one more?
Hmm.
And they said, yes, there's rules. There's like red lights, and you guys have these green lights and red lights and stuff, and you need to stop at them and stop signs.
When spirit's being sarcastic, right?
You need to
Like,
believe in those things. That's it.
Well, I think that's,
And that was it.
it's funny. I get the question all the time, like, when you start to do energy work and you want to make this your entire life, a lot of people struggle with what to charge for it. And it sounds kind of very, kind of earthbound, but it's an earthbound question. I'm like, you need to charge money so one, you can keep doing it, and two, you can keep your lights on, whatever that means to you. I think what they were explaining to you is listen, we need you to blend. We need you to be the voice of, you're our human representative. Put some clothes on,
Mhm. The thing
and I
is,
think
I
that's
mean,
good
it's
advice.
only a belief that means that we put our clothes on. We could be all walking around naked, but if we didn't have a belief that that was wrong, that would be irrelevant.
And again, it goes back to the agreements where we agreed that we should put clothes on. Up here in
Exactly.
upstate New York, it's pretty practical today because it got chilly.
Yeah.
but
But I mean,
but
if you
in
think about it, there's really absolutely nothing else that you have to believe in. And only when you remove all beliefs have you arrived at a place of peace.
Lori, I feel like that spirit was being a little tongue in cheek because they told you what, like, to not have beliefs, and then you're like, I need something, and they're like, yeah, wear clothes, follow the rules. Like, that almost is a conversation with me and spirit. Like, but I don't get it. I need just something, just one thing, please. And
Yes.
they're like, oh,
Oh,
like,
I drive them
turn
crazy.
your lights off when you get out of your car or your battery dies. And I'm like, well, that's
Believe,
that
yeah, believe
happens.
that. You can believe.
but
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 yeah, I drove
I,
them absolutely
I,
crazy.
I want to point out the profoundness that, Lori's spiritual awakening was about a jug by the water, TC. I just want to point that out to you.
It's the dawning of the age of Aquarius. What can I
There it
say?
is.
Yeah.
There it is. And TC and I kind of have some running jokes between the two of us. I'm a Pisces and she's an Aquarius, and her jugs are for my tears, basically. So that's just, that's just our ongoing conversation over and over again. So, the fact that that was your dynamic, I think there was kind of magic in a bottle there with that, because it kind of speaks to both of us, because it's like, you go through these series of things, real life happens, you got this going on, the kids, the work, the whatever, and then you drop back to what's your path, and you bring it back, and you're like, am I living my path when I'm distracted by all this stuff? It is life. You do stop at the red
Oh
lights.
yeah, and I asked them that. I said, "What's my path?" And I asked that like 500 times, and they said to me, come to Earth."
Do you feel burdened by that?
No, I felt they said your path is you chose to come to Earth, so go play, go have fun and go play on Earth.
That's awesome.
That was your path.
That's
You're
awesome.
you decided to jump into a human body and go play at Earth. So go play and enjoy it and find out what it's like to be in a human body and find out what it's like to stand on a bridge and look over at the beauty of a river. Find out what it's like to climb a mountain. You got legs now in the human body. Find out what it's like to in my case, lose 2 of my husbands and be a widow and grieve. Figure that one out. So that's the path. Path is you got, and I would say to people, you're here. You did it.
Yeah.
You got it. So now it's just realizing that being here is the path. It's not that you have a certain place to go or you have to do something. It's you're here. And so just enjoy Earth.
I love everything about that, and I can't think of a better way to wrap up this episode with that enlightenment, to enjoy the path and make it part of your everyday. And Lori, I want to thank you for being a part of this here. And again, do click on her website below. Check out her books. She has a memoir, which is also, we didn't even really talk about that, although I know you just shared some stories. Your view on power animals is fantastic. It's very well organized. It's the next level. And the retreats and the classes, do look, on everything. This is something that, you really kind of drove home how important it is to recognize your path and that it's not perfect. And, the combination of this, and to leave on the high note to say, I just want to thank you personally for being so open to this. And I don't think that our connection here today was by accident. I don't think any of that is ever, I think there's usually the accident on purpose.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not thrilled about how it comes together, but when you look back, you go, okay, all right, so I get that there was purpose.
Yeah. You're always.
All right, Lori. So we're just going to sign off to the podcast. We always give each other the heart tap, let one another know that we care and love for one another, even though we might be distant. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks to all of you. Ciao, ciao.